Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that video where she showed you how to bind off your knitting, and she did utter that phrase. It's so simple, anyone can do it. Hopefully you all feel competent and ready to take up your knitting project, because, if I can do it, it must be easy, so you guys can do it. And so, we'll have that knitting segment during the final exam. Yeah, that's what we'll do. But the idea that, if I can do it, it must be easy. I don't think people necessarily think to themselves, it must be easy if even I can do it. I think they think to themselves, now that I'm doing it, it's super easy. I can do it without even thinking about it. And therefore it now is easy and anybody else should be able to acquire it. So that's part of that projective way of knowing, because we're saying to ourselves, if I can do it, you can do it too, right? Like I'm putting out onto you the same expectation that I have for myself for being able to perform the task. All right. Now this is something that in a live class, I always like to have students do live. It sometimes works better than other times, depending how many people are in class. But let's play along and let's see if your pattern follows what I'm going to explain to you at the end. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is write down the last 2 digits of your social security number. Now, of course, it's completely private and so nobody's going to be able to see it. If you wanted to, if you don't know those numbers, some people don't have those memorized, you could do the last 2 digits of your student ID, or you could do the last 2 digits of your phone number or your address, or whatever 2 digits you want to use. I just don't like students to use their age because a lot of you are the same age and then we don't get enough variation in numbers that you've written down. So write down the last 2 digits of some number that's important to you that is not your age. All right. Now I'm going to show you a bunch of items. Some of them you might be willing to buy and some of them you might not be willing to buy. Your job is to write down how much you would be willing to pay for each of the items. So be careful not to write down how much you think it is. Like, don't try and guess the actual price of the item. You're writing down how much you would be willing to pay for each of these items. And what you're willing to pay might be significantly different from their actual value. So try not to worry about the actual value, just worry about what you would be willing to pay. All right, so the first one is a cordless trackball for your computer. I think it's popular among gamers, I've been told, but I'm not sure, because I looked at it and I was like, why do I need that? 0. But then my son explained to me it's popular with gamers. So, okay, cordless trackball. Number 2 is a design book. I pulled one off the internet that's literally called the Package Design Book, but you could imagine it could be like furniture design, or it could be, home design, or something else. It could be a topic that you want. So would you want a big book on design? How much would you be willing to pay for it is a question on each of these. So how much would you be willing to pay for a cordless trackball? How much would you be willing to pay for a design book? How much would you be willing to pay for a bottle of Jaboulet La Chapelle 1996 wine? Now, I'm no vintner, or what do you call it, sommelier or something, but I will tell you, apparently this is was a really good year. So how much would you be willing to pay for a bottle of Jaboulet La Chapelle 1996 wine? How much would you be willing to pay for a cordless keyboard and a mouse? How much would you be willing to pay for a pound of Belgian chocolates? Okay, so those are your choices. Hopefully you've written down a price for each of them. Now, what I normally like to do in the next phase in class is I break the board up, and like I said, I've asked students to write down any 2 digits that make sense for them, so I don't even know what their digit represents. But what I do is I break the span of numbers that they could have into quintiles, they're called. So if you wrote down 00 as your number, which I have yet to ever have had a student write down 00, but anyway, you could have written it down if it was your phone number or your social security number or something, right? So 00 up to 19 would be our first quintile. And it's called a quintile because see how we broke the possible numbers down into 5 groups. So quint is 5. So we've got 5 groups. 0 to 19, 20 to 39, 40 to 59, 60 to 79, 80 to 99. So those are our quintiles. And so normally what I do is I write those quintiles across the board, and then I have the students report how much they're willing to pay for each of the different objects that I listed. All right. And then we try and get an average score or price that the people in the different quintiles were willing to pay. So what I typically find is that on average, the people who are in the 0 to 19 quintile are willing to pay less on average for the items than the people who are in the 80 to 99 quintile. It gets a little murky in the middle there between the 20 and the 79. It gets a little murky, but on average, the lowest quintile offers the lowest average price for the items, and the highest quintile offers the highest average price for the items. So here's a table from the original study by Arley and colleagues, and they called it Coherent Arbitrariness. They actually did slightly different ideas. They did 2 different wines. I just left that out. I think I substituted something in. 1, 2, 3. No, I took out the average wine. And so here you see the quintiles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 corresponds to the 5 quintiles I have listed above. And what you're seeing is for the cordless trackball, you see the lowest average price being offered by the lowest quintile and the highest average price by the highest quintile. And you see that persisting across all of the categories. On average, the people who wrote down a number that was in the lowest quintile of numbers offered less for the objects. Now it gets a little mixed up. See under the column called rare wine, how the group 3 offered less than group 2 did on average. So it's not perfect, right? If you notice on the design book, same thing happened. So it's not perfect, but really when I focus in on the first quintile and the 5th quintile, you definitely see a difference in what they're offering. They called this coherent arbitrariness because the question is, what in the world could those 2 digits that you wrote down have to do with the amount of money that you're offering for these objects? Like literally, those numbers have nothing to do with the value of the item. So why would there be a relationship? And it's across all those different objects. Like, why would that happen? Arley interpreted it through what's known as the anchoring effect. I think our textbook calls it the anchoring heuristic. But the anchoring effect is when we use an arbitrary piece of information to help us to determine our judgment, especially in the face of ambiguous information. Like, how much am I willing to pay for a cordless trackball? I don't know. How much does one even cost? I have no idea. Like, I clearly don't use a cordless trackball because I don't even know how much they're worth, right? So I literally have nothing to go on to decide how much I'm willing to pay. And so the argument is that we will use the 2-digit number that we wrote down as an anchor for helping us to set up a response. So the anchor it's literally like an anchor on a boat. It sort of holds us here. So we go, okay, the last 2 digits that I wrote down were, I'm trying to think of a good quintile to join. I'll be in the lower quintile. So the last 2 digits that I wrote down were 1, 3. You ask me how much I'm willing to pay for a cordless trackball. I don't know. My mind's already in sort of a small number. So I'll give you something on the small end of the scale. So I'll give you something around $10 or something. Because I wrote down a small number for my 2-digit number, I'm already sort of in the small number realm of my judgment making. It sort of jumps into mind. A smaller number jumps into mind. Whereas if I had just written down 95, I'm on the larger end of my scale. So when I'm thinking about how much a cordless trackball is worth, if I wrote down 95, I might be thinking, well, it's probably it's probably a pretty good item. I guess I'll say something $25. I guess I say something larger. It's considered an arbitrary piece of information because that 2-digit number, is completely unrelated to the judgment that you're making, and yet you're using it to help you to make the judgment. So it's kind of a weird thing that we do, this anchoring effect, right? Where we use whatever we have to help us to decide what our response is going to be. All right, sticking with thinking errors, let's talk about something else. Let's say that you've gone to the movies. All right, you and your friend each just spent $10 to see a movie. About a half hour into the movie, you both realize that it's 2 thumbs down, a really bad movie. That's an old, I don't know if you guys even know what 2 thumbs down refers to, but hopefully you know that it means it's a bad movie. So you guys have decided you don't like it. You're whispering to each other and going, oh, this movie's terrible. What do you do? So I once posed this question to a class that contained somebody who worked for a movie theater, and she said that if you leave within the first 30 minutes, apparently you can get your money back. So let's say it was past that time limit. You can't get your money back. That's not an option. So your choices are to stay in the movie and finish it out, or get up and leave. I mean, really, those are your only 2 choices. One way or another, you've lost your $10, right? You either are going to stay in the movie because you paid your $10, or you're going to forfeit your $10 and leave. But one way or another, you're not getting your $10 back. So what do you do? Usually in my classes, students are a little mixed. Some people say, I'm leaving. I'm not going to sit through a stupid movie just because I paid for it. But it seems like a larger proportion of students will say, well, I mean, I might as well hang in. And I know for me, I've hung in with movies that I didn't even pay for, right? My mom and I were watching this stupid movie about golf. I literally don't even know what this movie was. She and I were at a convention and we turned it on. It was being shown on regular TV, so it was full of commercials. It took us like 3 hours. Neither of us would just concede and even fall asleep because it was getting to be 11 o'clock. And we're like, nope, we've got to finish this stupid movie. I've got to find out how this thing ends. I mean, any normal person would have changed the channel, but both of us were too stubborn to do it. So I'm on the camp of I probably would stay there and, gosh darn it, I paid for this movie. And maybe it'll take a turn. You never know. Maybe it's going to get better. I don't know. Optimism or stupidity. I don't know which it is. But so I can definitely see an argument for staying because clearly I have stayed. But I didn't stay under the guise of, well, I paid $10 and I want my money's worth. That's for sure. I was doing it because it was free. But a lot of people will give that argument. Well, I mean, I paid for it and I want to get my money's worth. But is it your money's worth to suffer through 2 hours of something that within the first 30 minutes you've decided is horrible and you don't want to waste your time on? Or are you just sticking there because you're like, well, I already invested my $10. I invested my $10 in consuming this information and I have to get my money's worth. If that's what you're thinking, it's what's called the sunk cost fallacy. I have already sunk some amount of cost into this activity and I don't want to, waste it, right? Like I paid my $10. I need to get an entire movie out of it, even if it's horrible. Okay, let's apply this to real life. How often have you, for example, maybe this will be something that you guys have ever done, invested money in fixing something like a car or a motorcycle or something like that, even where you've gotten to the point where the repairs that you're making are costing you more than the vehicle's even worth? And you're like, well, I mean, maybe this is the last thing I'll have to fix and then I'll have a good, reliable vehicle and it won't be a problem anymore, right? And it's like, I've already put so much into it. I can't give up now, right? So I have to keep putting so much into it. We had a car like that. And you finally get to a point where you're like, okay, seriously, I'm paying more for this repair than I could possibly get for this vehicle. Maybe it's time to stop sinking costs into this vehicle. But you feel like, well, but I've already put so much into it. I have to stick with it. How about like interpersonally? Some of us have friends who are maybe they're longtime friends. Maybe we've known them since we were kids. But the truth is they're not bringing any sunshine and light to our lives. Maybe they're bringing a lot of stress and turmoil to our lives. And it's become a really heavy cost to keep this person as a friend. But we're like, but we've been friends since we were in 8th grade. We have to stay friends. How can we not stay friends? I've invested so much. I've put so much into this relationship. That's us using the sunk cost fallacy. We do it with romantic partners also. Sometimes we'll stay with somebody longer than we should have romantically because we're like, well, but we've already been together for 3 years and, I don't want to give up now. And I've already put so much into it, right? That's the sunk cost fallacy. So these are thinking errors that can make it difficult for us to make good judgments in everyday life, as well as, sort of these experimental examples I've been giving you. All right, this one's going to be fun. You're going to select an answer for each of the questions or examples I'm going to give you. And here's the thing. So you want to decide which one you think is the correct answer in each setup. But the things I'm going to ask you, you probably don't know. And please do not pause this video and look it up on the internet. I will tell you all the information you need to know. I've looked it up on the internet, so you don't have to at the end. What I really want you to be focusing on is picking an answer and then rating your confidence level about that answer. So 50-50 would mean I'm just guessing, because there's only going to be two things to pick from. So you've either picked the right one or you've picked the wrong one. So 50-50 means you're just completely guessing. You're not confident at your answer at all. 100% means that you are positive that you are right. You are completely positive about the answer. You can pick any number between 50 and 100 to represent how confident you are for each of these responses. So don't go 50-50 or 100. You could have 87, you could have 63, you could have whatever number you want to represent how confident you feel. All right, let's jump in and you can start rating. So, which of the following are the more frequent causes of death in the United States? Number 1, is it all accidents or is it strokes? So pick your answer. You're going to choose either all accidents or you're going to choose strokes. And then you're going to rate how confident you are that you have picked the correct answer, or correct answer. Okay. Number 2, is it suicide or blood poisoning? So pick the one that you think is the correct answer, the more common cause of death, and then how confident you are about your selection. Number 3, is it homicide or diabetes? Number 4, is it motor vehicle? And the people who wrote the question wanted to make sure you knew what a motor vehicle was, so car, truck, or bus, accident, or colorectal cancer. And then finally, is it drowning or is it leukemia? All right, so those are our causes of death. Let's move on to number 6, which is going to be which country has the larger population? So you're picking the one that has a larger population. Number 6, is it Morocco or Saudi Arabia? Is it Australia or Myanmar? Is it South Africa or Vietnam? 9, is it Libya or Sri Lanka? And 10, is it Iraq or Tanzania? Okay, so for each of those, you want to select your answer and you want to give your confidence level about your answer. Feel free to pause me. I won't even know. I'm just going to labor on. All right. Well, I didn't animate this very well, so brace yourself. So, which city has the higher per capita crime rate? Chicago, Illinois, or Kansas City, Missouri? Las Vegas, Nevada, or Stockton, California? Miami, Florida, or Phoenix, Arizona? Honolulu, Hawaii, or Raleigh, North Carolina? New York, New York, or Aurora, Colorado? So select the ones that you think have the higher per capita crime rate, and then rate your confidence level. Okay, again, pause me if you need, but I'm gonna move forward here. So we're zooming in, and I got this data from a variety of websites, the CDC, the National Traffic Safety, what's it called? The National Traffic Safety Association, and then the Leukemia Society. All right, which of the following are more frequent causes of death? Number 1, it's all accidents. Slightly beats out strokes. So all accidents, it's a more common cause. Number 2 is blood poisoning. Way beats out suicide. 270,000 people die of blood poisoning. When I started counting all these things up, I'm like, how are there any people alive in the United States after all of this, right? I mean, start adding it up. This is a lot of people who die every year. 3, diabetes beats out homicide by about 4 times. Colorectal cancer beats out motor vehicle accident. And leukemia beats out drowning. Okay, so those are those. So you want to mark if you got it right or not. So keep track of your accuracy ratings, and then we'll deal with your confidence ratings in a second. Okay, moving to the next. Oops, I didn't know I was going to define that right now. Okay, what you're experiencing, by the way, as you're possibly not getting these right, is what we call the availability heuristic. If it's easy to think of, it must be common. And so we tend to overestimate the frequency of things that we hear about a lot. So we tend to overestimate suicide rates and homicide rates and car accidents and drownings. We tend to overestimate those things because when they do happen, we hear about them more often than things like strokes and blood poisoning and diabetes and colorectal cancer and leukemia. Those are sort of just like background things that typically don't get reported in the news too often, things like that, right? But suicides and homicides, people talk about those all the time. You know, certain of motor vehicle accidents might make the news, or you might know somebody who's died in a motor vehicle accident or something. And so, you know, if there's a drowning death, it's kind of weird with the news that the less common it is, the more likely it is that they talk about it. So, you know, you hear about a famous person's child who drowned and you're like, wow, oh my gosh, drownings. When in fact, it's very rare, like exceedingly rare. So if you hear about it a lot, if you can think about an example of it really easily, you think it's more common. All right, which country has the larger population? I got all this information from World Bank. Morocco has a larger population than Saudi Arabia. It's not a ton larger, but it is larger. Myanmar has a larger population than Australia, about twice the population. Vietnam has a higher population than South Africa, again, about twice-ish. I mean, I'm rounding. Sri Lanka is larger than Libya. And Tanzania is larger than Iraq. Okay, so again, if you're more familiar with a country, you're more likely to think it probably has a larger population, right? If I can think of that country, it's because I know, like, a lot of my students in class will say, what's Myanmar? And then I'll answer, well, it used to be called Burma. And they're like, that doesn't help, right? It's a fairly small country, sort of wedged over by India, is about as well as it's kind of near Sri Lanka, actually. If you don't know where it is, if you haven't heard of it, you're probably going to come to the conclusion that it's probably smaller. Like if it was bigger, I'd know what it was, right? And that makes a lot of sense. So if it comes to mind easily, you're probably thinking it has more. So the availability heuristic. And then finally, which city has the higher per capita crime rate? I got all of this from neighborhoodscout.com, and this is converted into per 100,000 people of population, so that they're all sort of on the same, right? That's what per capita means. Usually per capita means it'll be out of 100, but then we end up with like fractions and stuff. So I wanted to use whole numbers. So 100,000 people. I think Neighborhood Scout actually does it out of 10,000 people of population. So I had to round up a little bit. I had to move the decimal point. So Kansas City, Missouri has a higher per capita crime rate than Chicago does. Stockton has a higher per capita crime rate than Las Vegas by a lot. I was really surprised by how low Las Vegas is, frankly. But Phoenix has a higher per capita crime rate than Miami does. Raleigh, North Carolina has a higher rate than Honolulu. And Aurora, Colorado has a higher rate than New York, New York. So hopefully as you were going along, you were keeping track of your accuracy. Now let's deal with your confidence level. So what you're going to want to do is sum up all of your confidence ratings and then divide by 15 so that you can get your average confidence rating. So you might want to pause me and take a second to add up all of your confidence ratings and then divide them by 15. All right, so hopefully you paused, you did that, you're back. Okay, so now you have how many you got right out of 15. That's your accuracy. You want to divide how many you got right by 15, and that'll give you your percentage accuracy. It'll be in the form of a decimal point. You want to move your decimal point over 2 places to the right to convert it over into a percentage. So now you've got your percentage right. You've got your confidence level where you took your summed up confidence levels and divided them by 15. And also you need to move your decimal point over 2 places for that one to get into percentages. Here's the magic question. Were you more confident than you were correct? That's the question. Now, of course, you could only give a confidence level that was greater than 50%, right? Because that's how you were either right or you were wrong. Whereas your accuracy, you could have like all zeros. You could have been wrong on all of them. And so you think you could give 50% ratings of confidence for all of them and be 50% confident, and then have zeros because you got every single one of these wrong. And so you'd be like, well, I got none of them right and I was 50% confident. It looks like you were overconfident. We have to kind of convert that mentally, right? Know that 50% confidence level really means you were guessing. 100% means that you thought you were right. So are your confidence ratings closer to 100 or closer to 50 versus were your accuracies closer to 100 or closer to 50, right? On average, we tend to be more confident than we are correct, which is a whole separate thinking error that isn't really part of what we're talking about here, but I just wanted you to have this experience where you may have been more confident of your answers than you actually were accurate on your answers. And that's a really common thinking error. Once we give an answer, we tend to think, that was probably it. I'm probably right. When in fact, we're way off. So hopefully this exercise illustrated for you, most importantly, that availability heuristic, right? If it's easy to think of, it must be common. And then has that ancillary point that shows that even when we know we could put down 50% and say that we're guessing, a lot of times we give a number that's higher than that, and then we turn out to be wrong. We're more confident than correct usually. All right, I'm going to give you one more availability heuristic example from a study where they asked participants, are there more English words that begin with the letter K or that have K in the third position? So they asked participants this question, and on the left we have their judgments. So K in the first position is the purple bar, and K in the third position is the gold bar. Then they went and looked through the entire dictionary and found all the correct, like all the words that start with the letter K are in the purple bar on the right, in the side that says reality. And then all the words that have K in the third position are in the gold bar. And so what you see is that in the judgments, people were pretty equal, but they kind of were leaning towards there are more words that start with the letter K. Whereas in reality, there are way more, twice as many words that have K in the third position. So why did they make that mistake? Well, again, it's that availability heuristic. It's easier to think of words that start with the letter K and a lot more challenging to think of words that have K in the third position. And so if it's hard to think of examples, there must not be that many examples, is basically what the availability heuristic tells us. And so we make this incorrect judgment. We think that that K, words that start with the letter K are really common because look at all the ones I could think of. And it must be uncommon to have K in the third position because I could only think of a few. So if it's easy to think of, it must be common, right? That's the basic premise with the availability heuristic. All right, let's go ahead and stop here, and we will come back in the next segment and talk about some more thinking errors.